What I kind of tell people is once you stop seeing grass, it's probably time to get the mower out. And then you know you're safely mulch mowing when you kind of turn around, look behind you, and what you see is a majority of grass and a few little pieces of leaves here and there. If you look behind you, you see mostly leaves, then you probably waited too long between those mulch mowings.
Fall has officially arrived, and seemingly on cue, the leaves are beginning to fall. Typically, homeowners aren't too excited at the thought of having to rake their yards multiple times just to keep ahead of falling leaves. However, a K-State Research and Extension horticulture agent encourages homeowners to remove leaves from the lawn before they become too deep, especially if new grass was planted. That's because fallen leaves create shade, and excessive shade from a layer of leaves reduces the amount of sunlight that the grass receives. Leaf removal, though, is just one of the tasks that homeowners and gardeners should be tackling over the next 45 to 60 days. On today's Sound Living, fall and winter lawn and garden preparations. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wickman. K-State Research and Extension horticulture agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton, says that fallen leaves are not toxic to the grass and have little if any nutrient value. But once the leaves are composted or break down naturally, he says they're an excellent source of organic matter for soil. Dennis, the leaves are falling and it looks like it's going to continue for several more weeks. What are some things we need to keep in mind in terms of getting those leaves off the lawn?
When you think about leaves, most people think about them being trash, but actually if you really kind of look at them as being a treasure, it gives you a whole another way to think about them. But you're right, on the lawn themselves, if they pile up over winter, they're going to suffocate out the lawn. They're going to exclude the sunlight, and then you're going to have thin, dead areas come spring. So one way or another, you need to get those leaves up off the grass itself so you'll have a healthy lawn come next spring.
So what are some of the options then?
Well, you know, the traditional way to do that is get out the leaf rake and do a lot of hand work. But I actually like mulch mowing. So what happens is after you get just a thin layer of leaves on the lawn, not 6-8 inches, but just a thin layer, just a light covering, is take the bagger off your mower and mow over the leaves. And then the mower will chop and shred those leaves, and then they'll filter back to the soil surface. And research out of other institutions, extension like Michigan State, has found that you can probably mulch mow safely up to 6 to 8 inches of leaves back into the turf. Now that's multiple mowings, not one mowing. Then that just chops, shreds the leaves, and then they naturally break down, compost at the soil level, and release a little bit of nutrient organic matter back to the soil itself. What I kind of tell people is once you stop seeing grass, it's probably time to get the mower out. And then you know you're safely mulch mowing when you kind of turn around, look behind you, and what you see is a majority of grass and a few little pieces of leaves here and there. If you look behind you, you see mostly leaves, then you probably waited too long between those mulch mowings. Let's say you let too many leaves fall and you can't use the mulch mowing. So what I do the first time is I'll take the bagger off the mower and I'll just kind of mow helter-skelter through the lawn and let the mower chop. Then the second time I'll go through, I'll put the bagger back on and then pick up the leaves. Because if you have the bagger on the first time on most mowers, it doesn't chop the leaves, it just sucks them in whole. And you end up with this bulk. So if you let the mower chop them the first time, and some filter through, then put that bagging attachment back on, go through the second time, you'll probably cut the amount of volume you have in half, maybe even 3/4. Then you have just little thin shards of leaves, which are a lot easier to use in the compost pile, use as a mulch around your landscape plants. I like to hold them till next year and then use them to mulch my vegetable garden. So I kind of put them in my compost pile, but I'm not really thinking about making compost out of them.
You mentioned composting, and it's something that we can add to the compost pile. We can also use it in the garden. How much can we actually use, though?
You know, that's a great question. You know, at the very start I said you got to consider leaves. Most people think of them as trash, but if you think of them as treasure, they've got a lot of other uses. Composting is one, because once those break down, then you've got really that rich organic material that's going to help our clay soils. Other options you can do with those leaves is if you've got some shrub areas, you know, under tree shrubs around where you normally put wood mulch down, you can use leaf mulch as that. Or you can just hold them. Like I said earlier, I kind of like to put my leaves in my compost bin. And if I make compost over the winter, I do. If I don't, I don't. And then I mulch around my tomato plants, my pepper plants, my vegetable gardens next year. or you can also work them in as a soil amendment as the whole and let them compost in ground over winter. And usually you can probably compost in the ground 3 to 4 inches of shredded leaves, and that's about the same layer you'd use as a mulch layer, whether it's around the tree shrubs or your vegetable garden, probably around 3 to 4 inches of leaves. So really that mass of leaves, once you chip and shred them, doesn't go as far as you would really think they would. Now, if you've got that really heavily tree neighborhood, big old oak trees or sycamore trees with a lot of large leaves, that's going to go a lot farther than those little fine leaves coming off an elm, a honey locust tree, or something like that. Not all leaves are created equal, kind of like a lot of things. Some are coarse, some break down, some shred, some compact more. It just kind of depends on the tree they're coming from. The nice thing about using the leaves in the vegetable garden is they're all organic. So by the end of the season, they're pretty much broken down into organic matter naturally. They can be turned over, and that next year's layer of leaves can be added. It's just kind of a continual renewal process. I don't like to put anything in a vegetable garden that's going to be woody, that's going to last more than a season, because once that gets into the soil, it can start tying up the nitrogen and give us some problems with growth the following year. That's why those leaves are ideal, I think, in a vegetable garden. They look pretty nice, too.
And what should we be doing in the garden right now? I know there's still some produce out there, but what can we be thinking about?
I think at this time of year, I think the cleanup is always most important, because there are some diseases that overwinter on that old debris, getting all those old tomato vine peppers out of there, pretty much everything. Also, any weeds that you have in the garden, get those out of there, because they're just going to be loaded with seeds. Then you can also spade or till the soil, and I really recommend people that love the vegetable garden do their tillage in the fall, because a lot of times in Kansas come spring, we have wet weather. You can't get in there and work. It delays planting. So I like to do just what I call a rough till. So go in there, depending on the size of the garden. Mine's fairly small. I hand spade it, but I just leave it really kind of chunky. And then over the freezing and thawing of winter, all I have to do come March, April, hit it with a rake, and I'm ready to plant. And then you don't have to worry as much about those wet soils because you've already done your major tillage. You can also work those leaves into the garden so you're ready to go next spring.
And the good thing is if you're doing that tilling, you can also put some in a bag and get it off for a soil test.
Actually, that's a great idea, because I know we get bombarded with soil tests in the spring, and then people get a little impatient. They expect to get the results back in a day or two, and it takes, a couple weeks to get the results back. So the nice thing about soil testing through any K-State Extension office is that you'll have those results come spring when you're ready to plant, or if there's a pH change, you need to add some lime or some sulfur to the soil to change that pH. You can do it this fall, and then you have all winter for that change to start taking place, because you can work it in, incorporating the soil. So yeah, soil testing is easy to do. You need basically a cup of soil brought into your local extension office. We zip it off to K-State. They do all the analysis, and then we email you back the results, and you're good to go for the next 3 to 5 years.
And is this from different locations throughout the garden?
Right. The bigger the garden, the more random samples you want to take. So for an average size garden, half a dozen to maybe a larger, 10,000 square foot garden, maybe 10 or 12 samples. Maybe go down 4, 5, 6 inches deep, take small samples, mix them all together in a clean bucket. So you're going to collect more than that cup or 2 cups of soil. But what we're trying to get is a representative, uniform sample of the entire garden. And so that's why I want the multiple samples mixed together to give us that uniform reading from the entire garden area, just not one spot.
And if you're someone who does a lot of different plantings, do we need to be thinking about moving plantings around from one location to another?
That's called crop rotation. Back in the old days where gardens are really big, we had to preserve and can and freeze to feed the family. And now a lot of gardens are smaller. It's hard to rotate, but it would be good to move the tomatoes from one end of the garden to the other end of the garden, just because different plants utilize the soil differently, different insects, different diseases feeds on the plants. So crop rotation is always a great idea. Now in a small garden, like some of the people just growing in little 4x8 raised beds, it's really kind of hard to do a lot of crop rotation. So that's why that sanitation is so important. But yes, whenever possible, move around those crops in that garden.
In terms of what we should be thinking about as we head into winter, not quite time to put the mower away just yet, but there are some things that we could probably start doing.
Good point about putting the mower away. We just talked about using the mower to pick up the leaves, but really we want to keep that mowing up until the grass stops its growth. Now, for those with warm season grasses, the zoysia, the Bermuda grass, that first frost, they're done for the season. In northeast Kansas, where I'm from, in Johnson County, our majority of lawns are cool season lawns, bluegrass, tall fescue lawns, and those will continue to grow up, in a warm November, maybe even up to Thanksgiving. So you want to send that lawn into the winter at the same mowing height you've been mowing at all summer long. So, like on a zoysia Bermuda lawn, maybe a couple inches. For that bluegrass tall fescue lawn, probably around 3 inches, and just send them in. And then come spring, you want to drop that mowing height maybe a notch to pick up some of that debris. But for the most part, mow as needed so you have a nice lawn going into winter months.
And then when we reach the point where we're no longer mowing, we need to think about either getting the gas out or adding a fuel stabilizer?
That's right. Modern gasolines tend to be a little more stable than older, but it's still good either to run the mower completely out of gas or add a fuel stabilizer. Either way, kind of depends on your style. I try to run my mower out of gas and then in season. That way it's not evaporating, it's just not setting in there. But you can also add the stabilizer with that last mow too. And also, why not at that point in time go ahead and schedule the tune-up? Because no one else is thinking about tuning their mower up in November, December. They're all waiting till March, and then there's a line. So maybe just at the end of the season, go ahead, whether it's yourself, get that oil change the air filter, sharpen the blade, add a new blade. Also check the tires. This is something I learned too. As those tires wear down, your mowing heights aren't true. Just like on your cars, the treads wear, so do the treads on the mower. And you'll be amazed that sometimes putting new wheels on will add a half an inch back to the mowing height where you thought you might be mowing fairly high based on the settings, but those wheels do need to be updated from time to time because they wear down.
Some other things that we can think about are garden hoses. We need to take care of those.
That's right. Definitely you're going to need to unhook them from your house or any of the faucets because that causes backup pressure. They don't drain, and that could cause frozen pipes. But then once you unhook those hoses, it's really good to drain them because water, as you know, as it freezes, it expands and can rupture the hose. Ideally, you'd want to store that hose inside or maybe in a container out of the sunlight because they're plastic and sunlight's going to deteriorate those hoses. So drain them, roll them up, put them out of the sunny location, or I like to just tie them up with some twine or something and just hang them in the garage, and then they're ready to go for winter because a good hose is an expensive investment, and you want to make sure you treat it with kindness.
We want to make sure the trees are also ready for winter. They need to be well watered.
That's a great point. Before you put those hoses away, you want to make sure everything's got good soil moisture, especially anything young just planted this year, evergreens that are really young. And in most Kansas winters, if we get some snowfall, we get some rain, we probably won't need supplemental moisture. But if we get one of those dry, freezing, thawing winters without a lot of precipitation, then you maybe want to check that soil come January, February, and maybe give those trees a drink of water on a warm day when the soil's not frozen.
What do we need to do in terms of houseplant care?
Once those plants come back in, the thing you got to watch out for is insect development because they've been outside where they're exposed to all the elements, all the aphids and whiteflies and scale and spider mites. And of course, once you get them in the home at that, around 70 degrees, that nice even temperature, they love to multiply really fast. So you might just want to check them from time to time to make sure insects don't build up and get out of hand. And then insecticidal soaps, those work really nice for taking care of most problems with houseplants indoors, and that would be considered organic. But just keep an eye on them. Don't fertilize those houseplants during the winter months. You might kind of even keep a little bit on the dry side, but then watch for the insects. And the other thing that happens with houseplants that we had outside, they're going to start losing some leaves because they were outside, even in the shade, they were under some fairly high light, and your home is going to be fairly low light. So probably a month, 2 months or so after they come in, you're going to start seeing some yellowing leaves, and that's fairly typical. The goal really is just to keep them alive and then give them a haircut, give them a trim when you put them back out next May, and they'll get bushy, grow all over again, and kind of start the process all over. So it's more about just keeping alive during the winter months, maybe not promoting growth.
You have a lot of publications. Extension has a lot of publications. How can people find those?
What I tell people to do is just Google. And what I like to do is to get people honing in. So just don't Google mowing the lawn. Maybe put mowing the lawn Kansas Extension. And that'll get our extension publications sorted out of the Google maze, and you'll get local information. So you could also put your county in there too. I know in Johnson County we have a lot of publications, fact sheets we wrote in-house. So you could also get us down to the point like one we've got that a lot of people love is on hydrangeas. So hydrangeas, Kansas Extension, Johnson County. So just refine your search, and that'll a lot of times help you find those publications. Or you can just go on the KSRE website and go to publications and get all the horticulture publications, and there's a lot of great information there for people to find.
That's K-State Research and Extension Horticulture Agent for Johnson County, Dennis Patton. For answers to your lawn and garden questions, you can contact the nearest county or district extension office, visit the extension website, ksre.ksu.edu, or conduct an online search, adding keywords such as K-State and Extension. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wickman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.